I'm Eric Chummy, and this is Politely Pushy. Welcome to Politely Pushy. As always, I'm your host, Eric Chummy. Today, I am joined by Walter Thompson. He's an independent journalist based out of San Francisco with years of experience at places like TechCrunch, many startups, many other media outlets. And now Walter's launched his own podcast, Fund, Build, Scale, where he interviews founders to talk about their experience, how they raise their money, how they're actually building and scaling their business. Walter, thanks so much for joining me here on the show.
Eric, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I don't even know where to begin because you've done so many things. You've been a tech startup guy. You've also been a journalist writing about tech startup guys and women and all that. So like, how do you define yourself, right? I know you're a journalist now, but you're such a unique path. What do you tell someone when you meet them at an event?
Gosh, usually independent journalist kind of answers a lot of questions, or maybe it blunts a lot of questions because it's kind of amorphous. I agree. So it's a really indirect path I've had into journalism. When I was kind of in my 20s, there really weren't a lot of jobs in journalism. People were cutting back. And so I looked for something where I could use my creative skills. And like all writers, you have to be pretty nimble to make a living as a writer. So I saw a job for an editor-in-chief position at a internet company. And I was like, I could do that. And so that job led me.
I can go right to the top. I can go right to editor-in-chief, right in my 20s.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was one of those things where they indicated they were looking, not a lot of experience required. So I was like, okay, well, this seems attainable. So I went for it. Luckily enough, they chose me. And here's the funny part of the story. We were in DC at the time, and the company that acquired us moved us. Hey, you should be in San Francisco where all the action is. So they moved us out to San Francisco, and I think it was October of '96. And then that company went out of business in May the following year. So I just found myself here in San Francisco with no prospects, no job, some friends who are all in the same boat. And a lot of them migrated or kind of just were drawn back to the East Coast where they came from. But for some reason, I just decided, well, not for some reason. I like living in San Francisco. It's very pleasant here. It's physically beautiful. The landscape is stunning. And on some level, the city seemed familiar. It's overrepresented in movies and literature. And so the city had a weirdly familiar feel to me. So
I grew up with Full House, the famous San Francisco-based sitcom. That was mine.
Yeah, I mean, but it's one of those things. I walk a lot. I used to have a car, but I walk almost every place in San Francisco. And every day I find myself nearly in front of another location from a movie I recognize. I live near Kezar Stadium, which had the big climactic scene in Dirty Harry where he's on the 50-yard line standing over like the crazy killer. It's like every day there's something else. And I also love helping out tourists. They are part of the lifeblood of the city, and I love offering people directions and helping them out and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of fun.
So you ended up there randomly, loved it, and now you're there almost 30 years later.
Almost, yeah. Like I like to joke. I mean, it's a terrible joke that I was part of that first wave of the dot-commers who ruined San Francisco, and now I'm making amends. I'm doing what I can to make things happen.
You're paying it forward. You're giving back to the community.
Indeed.
The new podcast, Fund, Build, Scale. You've done a couple seasons now. It's still in the double digits of episodes in total episodes, with a lot of big name startup founders. People that I certainly know. What are you learning there that maybe you didn't know, despite having been in this ecosystem for a long time, working at startups yourself, talking about them yourself, reporting on them? What all of a sudden is this format opening for you mentally?
Well, I mean, so what I'm learning a lot is actually about the founder journey itself, the actual, it's a lot. Obviously it's a high pressure job if you're the CEO founder of an early stage startup. And so, I'm learning about kind of the contours of the fundamentals of how to, as the title suggests, how to fund, build, and scale, but also just kind of the mental struggle of what it takes to be, out there every day, fundraising on your own behalf, telling your own story, perfecting your story, being the hero of your story, and trying to win people's confidence so that strangers will give you money, essentially, and you can actually go on your way to building the business. One of the things I've learned most is that fundraising actually, and I think I knew this before I started, fundraising is just one small part of the whole thing. I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to start the podcast was because I felt like too much of the focus on startups is just, how I pitched and how I won, and here's my winning pitch deck. There's a lot more work to that goes on in the day-to-day work of validating your idea and building a business and doing customer discovery and building a team and finding ways to make yourself attractive enough that people will want to join your team, even when you don't have revenue or customers. And so it's a lot of work that's not really well understood. And so my goal for the podcast is kind of just to bring some transparency to what really goes on as far as how to creating a startup. The tagline I have for the podcast is how to create a startup when all you have is an idea, because I think that's where that's where everyone starts from. And some people who are fortunate enough to go to places like Stanford or UC Berkeley, they might have a professor who's an angel investor. And so they're learning this stuff, and at the undergrad level, they're learning what product market fit means and what a go-to-market strategy looks like before they're even able to drink legally in some cases. So for people who didn't come from that kind of background, it's good for them to kind of understand, I think, like what the language is, how you're expected to sound in an investor meeting, what the red flags are that you can take off of yourself before you actually send in your pitch deck, so that people understand, oh, this person's thought this thing through, or they understand how to de-risk themselves before they pitch themselves to an investor.
There's a lot there. There are so many questions from there, because you said funding is obviously just one small part of it, which we know, right? You can get all the funding in the world. If you can't run the business, you can't hire, you can't manage, you can't have co-founders, partners, you sell, so you're going to go out of business. But I feel like the CEOs they believe that I have to be able to do all of this, right? I have to be the best fundraiser, the best customer salesperson, the best, PR person, the best engineer, certainly the best manager. What are the skills that, if you had to rank in terms of importance, or if you had to say maybe, hey, you actually don't need these couple of skills, or you do need these couple of, how do you differentiate from your experience? These are the ones you really need, and maybe these ones you don't actually have to be that good at.
So I would say the one most important thing is this. It is, and it's kind of cliche, but it really is true. It's storytelling. Basically, you need to be able to tell your own story in a way that is convincing, not just to investors, but also to potential customers and to people you're trying to attract to work for you. There's no shortcut for that. And so that is the first step. Until you can actually find a way to describe your business in a way that makes people excited about it and makes them want to be a part of it, whether they're giving you money or whether they're sitting at a desk virtually, working inside your company. That's the first most important thing. And the rest of it is kind of, it's important, but it's not. Those are things you can find people to help you with or delegate. So for sales, for example, by the time you actually need a full-time salesperson, that's not hard to find. You can actually, but the initial part of like coming up with that initial sales motion and finding the value inside your idea, inside your company that people will want to pay for, that's up to you. So yeah, there's some hard things every founder must do, but the other things, like, they can often delegate. What I'm learning actually, and what I've seen from experience, is that a lot of founders have trouble delegating. That's the hard thing. They think because of, this kind of concept of startup grind culture that they need to be the all-star who can do it all. And I feel like that's actually a trap for a lot of people. I feel like nobody can do it all. So that's a false expectation. So instead of trying to be the best engineer and the best manager and the best negotiator and the best, office manager, hire an office manager or delegate some of these tasks. It's okay if you're working in a startup with a few people. Everyone needs to wear a number of hats, and nobody likes a cowboy. Or I shouldn't say that. That's not true. But I'll tell you a story. I used to work in a startup way back when, and there was one person on the team who had a senior role, and he was supposed to manage other people and get good work out of them. But he had a very much kind of like, I'll do it kind of a mentality. And behind his back, everyone called him Captain America in a very sarcastic fashion. Oh, great. Captain America is here to save the day. That person didn't do well. They eventually left the company, and I don't think they're even in tech anymore, because there's room for individual contributors, but you really want to find people who are looking to do more than what they're asked to do. That's a long way of answering the question. I'm sorry, but I think a lot of people just have trouble letting go of things and delegating to people that they can trust to do the job well.
What about in a world where your budget is limited, right? Your funding is limited. Okay, well, it'd be great to hire a salesperson full-time. It'd be great to have an office manager. It'd be great to have these engineers. It'd be great to delegate, but I don't have enough money to do it. So then now where do you say, advice-wise, from what you've heard, the experience of success stories and failure stories? Okay, if budget is limiting, how do you rank in order? Okay, well, spend your money on this before you spend your money delegating to a different type of professional.
Well, I mean, so even the sales thing, for example, that's a good example right there. Most people, again, what I've seen and what I've been hearing from the investors who are giving these people money, a lot of people hire for sales and marketing way too early because they hire before they have repeatability, before they actually have the story, that value proposition. They feel like they're supposed to hire performatively for this role because they're going to market, they need a marketing person. So I think really it's more about not like scaling back your expectations as far as doing the most with what you have. And if you don't have a marketing person on board, then like you could actually hire a part-time marketing person for a couple of hours, a fractional CMO. Like more, I've actually interviewed a guest who offers people as he offers fractional CFOs, but there are fractional executives who can come in who have a lot of experience doing things in your sector, who can come in for 2 3 days a week and do the same job that a full-time person could do. And you don't have to pay their benefits. You don't have to pay some amazing full-time salary to that person. You're just paying for them to contribute a couple days a week.
The fractional thing is weird to me because I feel like you still think about it all the time when you're at home, right? If you're that fractional person, right, you have all this in your head and you're giving them all the same connections and all the same ideas and all the same stuff, but you're getting paid a fraction of the cost. And maybe, yeah, you don't go in a day or two, but I feel like so many full-time employees are kind of not working a day or two anyway, because they're doing personal stuff or they're working from home. So I feel like the fractional person is getting a raw deal. And the companies, yeah, if I were a company, I'd hire all these fractional people because you would get a lot of value out of them.
Well, it would be hard to manage though. If you had a lot of like, if you had a fractional CFO and if you had a fractional CMO, and if you had like, an outsourced marketing, like a, engineering lead, it would be really hard to kind of have a cohesive company culture of any kind. And so what I'm hearing is basically, so for a fractional marketing person or a fractional CFO, it's really more of a bridge to get you to where you want to be. When you actually need a full-time HR function and somebody who is looking at benefits programs and deciding which dental insurance is, yeah, then that's when you probably definitely need a full-time CFO. But in the meantime, if you're pre-revenue, you could probably just use some kind of accounting program and have someone come in one day a week and make sure you're compliant with other things, probably. I think people just, part of what I'm hearing is that people, once they're, I'm funded, so they need to spend that money. And that's actually not the case. You're funded. So the other thing I was going to say about
don't waste it. It's like an allowance from your mom when you were a kid. If you spend it sooner, you're in trouble. That's not going to help you. Yeah.
And it's twofold. Some people, they spend the money too quickly. Other people are afraid to spend the money because they don't know whether they'll be able to get more. But going back to the fractional thing for a second, all the fractional people I know doing fractional roles are doing it with multiple companies. And so they're not wringing themselves dry for one company. They're doing it with like 3 or 4 companies at a time and distributing. And so they're actually creating value and getting value in return, I think.
Have you been able to figure out prediction wise? And I think I've been bad at this. When I hear about ideas, companies, founders, and I just think that'll never go anywhere. And I'm wrong. Or ones I think, oh, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. And I'm wrong. Do you feel like you have a sense from your experience of, I think I can pick winners and losers? And do you have and then based on that, I'll ask you a follow-up after this.
I mean, yes, I've been at this for a while. I definitely think I have a sense of, if I hear someone's pitch as far as like, oh, I created a company that does, there's some things, yes, I can look at or hear about, and I realize this is not going to be a business that people will want to support, like a consumer business, or consumer is easier. Enterprise companies, it's harder because I don't really understand that world as well of enterprise software, and I'm not working at a financial services company, and so the problems I might have are different than problems at Visa or Bank of America. But as far as consumer plays, I definitely can see. I have an X-ray vision, I would say, as far as I can see what's going to be like. I can see the weaknesses inside a product as soon as it launches. And there are some things that kind of just, I'm not saying this very well. There's some things where you can kind of see why people talk about there's a need for more diversity in tech, because the products that get funded, and you're kind of like, I'm not so sure about that one. The one that comes to my mind actually is Juicero. I'm sure people know about that one. It was a device that you put a bag of juice in, and it sat in your hand, and then the device would dispense from the bag of juice. You put it in. I'm like, I don't understand anything about the problem it's trying to solve here. I just don't. It just doesn't make any sense. And the company was, kind of laughed about it, and then eventually it all went away. Another one, going even further back, internet smelling technology, internet scent technology. The idea that you could attach a peripheral to a laptop or a device, and it would actually create ambient scents depending on what you're looking at on the computer. I don't really know what problem they're trying to solve, but they got funded and had a run.
I know what the problem is. The problem is, hey, I want to smell. Hey, you know what I'm talking to you? I want to smell what your room is like right now. I want to smell that laundry fresh coming out of your machines over there. I want to smell that couch that I see right there. I get the problem. That's an age-old problem, right? Smelling at a distance, but I'm not sure how we solve for that one. I don't know how we solve that one.
Is it a problem though? I mean, I mean, so like I feel as though, like, living in San Francisco, again, I have a really weird and warped, because it's like a reality distortion field, because all these companies are here, and so
right.
all those products and services start here, and so things like so I live in San Francisco. There used to be laundromats in every neighborhood, and there aren't anymore because these apps they popped up that with laundry services many of them are fads, and a lot of them went away. But the point is, between local real estate being what it is and the need on these laundry apps, a lot of neighborhoods don't have laundromats anymore. You got to walk further or get a bus to go do your laundry. Luckily, I have laundry in my building, but it's just one of those weird things where it's kind of like, the weird tech here kind of just like, it definitely, people in San Francisco, I think, don't really understand how the rest of the world doesn't really live like the rest of the world doesn't have, most places, driverless taxis roaming the streets and stuff like that. So that's not the usual. And so I think definitely here we have a skewed version of reality based on how much technology we're just swimming in, which is good and bad.
I see that growing up. I'm the inverse of you. I grew up in California, and now I'm on the East Coast, right outside New York City. So you see your own skewed thing here, right? You go to New York City, the way people live in that city is so different from the rest of the country, right? Sort of San Francisco, the density of the city changes. Hey, you're not doing cars and highways, right? You're not living in a single family home. It's its own distortion field. It's hard to get off the island. It's hard to do that. So I see how these certain industries, they revolve in certain bubbles. But
I worry though. I worry about my own sense as a journalist, because again, I've lived in San Francisco half my life at this point, almost half my life. I have taken more than 50 rides in a Waymo, those driverless taxis. And so for me, that is a very, very just average kind of, that's how I get around town sometimes. If I'm not walking, it's too far I'll get a Waymo. And it's not remarkable for me anymore. A few weeks ago, I was out with some friends. We were going from a bar to someone's party, and someone's like, "Oh, we need to get a car." And I said, "Oh, I got it. I'll call a car." And when the driverless taxi pulled up, I looked at my friends' faces and I realized the other three of them had never been in a driverless taxi before. And I had just kind of assumed, getting a ride means driverless taxi with a robot with no steering wheel. With no one at the steering wheel. And they all went with me on the ride. It was a lot of fun, but it definitely reminded me that I get caught up in this tech bubble that I live in.
So speaking of that tech bubble, speaking of driverless taxis and all of that, tell me about the new season of the podcast, Fun Build Scale. I know you've had on the interview format before, more that one-on-one format, but you're trying to bring something different. What are we going to see differently going forward? Something like it's 4 screens and you're going to get a deck in there. It sounds like you're getting outside the bubble here. What's going on?
Well, yeah. So season one was all about AI, early stage AI startups. And then season 2, I kind of expanded basically, and I'm still in the middle of it right now. I'm up to episode 5 or 6, I think, at this point. It's just basically the early stage startup experience from seed to Series A. I figure once you're beyond Series A, you're kind of on some kind of rails towards success or something. But all those initial problems, or challenges and fundamental universal issues that people have to go through to get from seed to Series A. And I'm looking forward to season 3, which will probably start this fall. I need to get through the 30 episodes I have for season 2. But basically for season 3, I'm actually planning to do the concept I have in mind. I just need to get enough people to participate, is basically kind of like what we were talking about before, kind of a 4-screen Zoom call with, I'm in one screen, I'm talking to an investor, I'm talking to the founder in screen 3. And then the 4th screen would basically be the pitch deck that the seed stage or early stage pitch deck that they basically, the founder pitched that investor liked. And we kind of just walk through it together and kind of talk about what worked, what didn't. what they saw that made them want to, look further as far as due diligence. Because I feel like that's kind of a useful kind of deconstructing kind of like what worked or what didn't, and kind of with the participants themselves, not just my take on the whole thing, but actually the people who were involved. I feel like kind of just lifting up the curtain and would really be useful. It's one of those things when I think about what I want to see in the podcast, I usually start with what would be interesting to me personally. And so that's a conversation I'd like to have. I'd like to talk to some investors and some early stage founders about that first pitch deck and how it led to the relationship they have now.
You mentioned on your website, on the podcast website, and we hinted at it a little bit earlier, it's about the storytelling. It's about who you know. It's about when you're trying to get that funding, right? It's not necessarily the merits of the technology, because everyone's got great tech, or a lot of people do, but I think the investors themselves are not as technical as the founders. So the investors sometimes don't understand the level of technology. So they need someone else to validate, verify, right? Okay, well, if this guy is your friend, or you used to work at this company, or some other guy is investing, then maybe I can use that as validity for myself. So how much of this game is truly less about technology and more about the soft skills that a lot of us engineering students hated, right? Like, I don't want to talk about communication. I don't want soft skills. I only want hard skills.
It is really the soft skills are where the success is. Yes. If you're a known quantity, right. If you have a previous company, or if you've had a previous win in some capitalistic sense, then it's pretty easy to get the meetings and get the access. But if you are, let's say, like, you've got 2 PhDs in machine learning and AI, and you're presenting yourself to investors, if you don't have a warm intro, you're not really going to get any place. You'll get someplace, but the warm intro is going to get you the access you need. So it's critical. It's not fun. But if you think of it as it's 2 things. It's working a muscle. Like, if you're one of those things, like if you're a former athlete and you're used to talking to people who used to spending a lot of time with people who aren't like you, and getting a team together, like, you can take that skill into building a company and do pretty well probably. If you were in the military and you know about leading people and managing people and getting the best work out of them, you can take that skill and bring it to leading a company. If you manage a household and had to do all that logistics of like timelines and budgeting, and you can manage a company. The thing I would say is this, and this is one of the things I'm most passionate about as far as doing this podcast. I don't believe there's any such thing as founder DNA. I think that's a lot of storytelling, and I think it's actually a form of gatekeeping. I think, and the podcast is actually proving me true, if you actually can do these basic best practices of how to describe your company, how to research and validate your idea, how to build a team, you can build a sustainable company if you can do those basics. It's not easy. It's very hard, but it's not difficult. It just takes time and pressure and energy, but it's not beyond anyone's like reasoning as far as like, as far as their ability to do this. It's just a matter of, do you want to do it and how badly?
Founder DNA. It goes back to something I wanted to ask you about. So I'm glad you brought it up. Is there a profile of success? Is there some kind of successful founder profile of characteristics? Maybe it's not founder DNA, but it's, okay, they need to have these skills, or they need to have this experience, or is there any kind of common theme that differentiates the successful founders from the failed founders, or not? And I'll maybe start answering my own question, but when we see a lot of these guys, like you've had them on, hey, their first few startups were a failure, then they became a success. Some guys are successful on the first attempt. Some guys are great on the first one, and then they never repeat that success in the future. Some, and then the winners have a profile that often look exactly like the failure. So I don't know if there's an answer, but I'm curious if there's some data point, some feature about someone that you can put them in one bucket or the other.
I have a ready answer. I had an answer 5 seconds ago, and I feel bad because I feel like it should have been harder to come to. The answer is perseverance. It's basically just that. If you basically keep at it, if you ignore the idea that 90% of startups fail and you're not going to get any place and most people can get the funding, you have to have a will, you have to suspend disbelief. But if you can suspend disbelief and keep driving towards your goal, you'll get someplace. It's just the relentless pursuit, the relentless like perseverance, and like the belief in your idea, and the willingness not just to keep try to run through walls, but also adapting your idea, listening to feedback, shaping your idea so that it appeals to people and gets people, not just like having like some unswerving belief in like your own goodness, but actually having an idea and being open enough to carry that idea through like, different obstacles and to different audiences and shape the idea so that it actually has an appeal to more people and more people. That's what entrepreneurship is, I believe. It's not about like just kind of I have great selling skills, right? I have very persuasive skills. You have to basically be willing to cultivate your idea and carry it, but also at the same time be open to changing it depending on what you have. But really, it's the perseverance thing. You have to stay in the game, and because people who can be talked out of something, they shouldn't be doing that thing in the first place.
I agree with you on perseverance, but at what point does reality set in terms of, hey, this is going to be a failure, we have to stop, or we're getting shut down? Or are you saying like, no, like if you keep persevering, then there is no quitting, there is no failure? Like at what point, where do you draw that dial up versus dial down?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, at a certain point, you're going to realize that like, if you're at a certain point, you may very well realize that the idea you have is not as valuable to other people as you thought it was originally when it occurred to you. And so that's a certain point that's when you throw in the towel and you turn off the lights. But I think it's kind of funny because like, most people I talk to in Silicon Valley don't equate that with failure. Most people like when I hear about failure, it's more about I couldn't raise more money from a few people. And I think that's an interesting way of kind of talking about like just, what failure is, because the other people I've talked to, the more experienced entrepreneurs, they all tell me that, and it's very easy for them to say now because they're doing well. But like those initial, the 2-3 startups that tanked, they learned from like a lot. And it was those failures that made them successful today. And it sounds really cheesy, but again, it's just one of those things. It doesn't need to be your first company probably won't be a success. That's fine. But the relationships you make, building that company, the people you talk to, the friendships you make, the people you hire, the investors who counseled you along the way. If you want to do this again, like it's going to be a lot easier the next time because you're a known quantity and you've got some experience under your belt. So a failed startup isn't really like, I'm not sure what a failed startup basically is. Kind of like, to me, like Theranos is a failed startup. It was fraudulent. It didn't.
Right.
It never delivered on its promise.
Right. Like there's nothing to learn from that.
Right.
Because it was just a complete fraud from the foundation, as opposed to, I see your point, like, hey, I tried something. Right. This wasn't the right year for that idea, or I didn't have the right co-founder, or I didn't have the right whatever, but maybe 5 years from now, with some experience, I could be great.
You remember Webvan, the way back when it was like, I saw like 20 years or so ago.
Yeah.
It was like this kind of home grocery delivery at these bins, they bring it to your house, and like that, and they expanded too quickly and disappeared. And now grocery delivery is completely a thing. Right. We take it for granted. So it's just like, did they fail, or did they just like validate the idea for somebody else to pick up years later when they could scale the whole thing up logistically? And
Yeah, that's a good point. So then talk about now on the journalism side, certainly having worked at TechCrunch, doing your thing now, what are the kinds of stories that you want to hear about, you want to get pitched on, you want to spend time on, and what are the stories that you want to delete the email and hang up the phone call as fast as possible?
Well, I mean, fortunately these days, I'm really just it's all about the podcast. It's all about these, talking to founders and investors to kind of pull out these strategies and tactics. Yeah, I mean, as far as those areas of or sectors really kind of interest me less. Online gambling probably doesn't really interest me that much. Crypto / blockchain. It's not that I'm not anti-crypto or blockchain. I just don't really fully personally see the use cases that make me want to, lean into it and have more conversations. I think it's interesting. I think it's one of those things that'll probably be more interesting in 5 or 10 years, I suppose. But yeah, I think I'm kind of just very basic as far as like people who are building companies that are solving interesting problems, people who are building companies that are changing the way people do things. I find those personally interesting. People who came into like tech from like untraditional ways, whether it was like something academic or they were a non-tech person who just stumbled into building a tech company because technology was the tool for solving the problem they wanted to solve. I just want to talk to people who are doing interesting things and kind of, but still have some I mean, You talked actually going back to the whole thing. What did people have in common? So the perseverance thing is definitely one, but I think the other thing I would say is also, and this sounds oddly, this is going to be very idiosyncratic. They're not. They have strong egos, but they're not egotistical. If that makes sense. Like they're very like they believe very strongly in their idea and the value they want to create and bring to the world. But they're not so ego driven that they can't listen to other people's feedback and again change their tack if they need to. And so those are the people I want to talk to, not the people who want to come on and discuss like some great success story or plug their business. I want to talk to you about like what you learned from, you know, the company that didn't get off the ground and how it felt when you had to, you know, fire someone for the very first time, or how it felt when you actually got that first check after you signed the term sheet, and what you did with it that day, as far as like what was the next week like for you, as far as your priorities, or were you excited, were you filled with dread and anxiety, like how was it? I mean, I want to really unpack the experience of what it's like to build these companies, so that people who are listening into the podcast can understand what it's like, because I feel like you're not going to get the what it's like vibe from reading articles about fundraising, articles about, you know, series like so and so raised a Series A and this person just sold their company. That is not the story. That's a thin slice of the top layer of the story.
Speaking on that, right? Getting the real story. What's your belief about this idea that's floating out there right now? And you see a lot of practitioners talk about it. Hey, if you're a startup founder, you can't rely on traditional media. You shouldn't even be using traditional media. You should be going direct. You should just be on Twitter, X, or you should be on social. You should be on there yourself. They need to hear from you. You need to have a super senior and experienced, let's say, head of social media, for example. Like, that's your channel, and that's where everyone needs to be. Traditional media is dead. Don't waste your time with it, right? And obviously, you were just in traditional media until just recently. What is your take on that advice?
I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to it. I don't think anyone really wants to read, a press release from Google. I think they'd rather, or Microsoft. I think they'd rather see what, you know, Satya's posting on his LinkedIn page. It's just more interesting when it's coming from a person than when it's coming from a corporate, you know, entity. So I think definitely, like, I think founders definitely have to, in this new world, be performers in some sense. They have to basically, they have to be the brand. They have to be brand builders. And I don't necessarily, honestly, I don't love that. I'll be honest. I don't love the idea that the CEO has to be like the face of the company and the brand builder. And whenever I like, if a few times I'm watching television and I see a commercial and it's the CEO of the company touting the benefits or why they think you should buy their product, and I'm like, you're the CEO. Of course you'd say these things. This doesn't move me one way or the other. But for people, I do think this new world.
But are you moved by a celebrity endorser though? It's like, of course you're saying it. They're paying you to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm terrible. This is a fun Walter fact. My parents had they were pretty good as far as, you know, limits and stuff like that. But as far as television, my parents had this rule: I could watch as much television as I wanted to, but they wouldn't buy me anything I saw advertised on TV. And so I became a super skeptical consumer, where TV was just a place where I got stories, and the commercials were just like, they were wallpaper to me. So I'm not a good person to ask about like what is effective marketing and advertising, because I'm skeptical of everything. But
how much TV were you watching as a kid? Now I'm curious about this, as I try to figure out how much TV my kids should be watching.
I mean, I probably was watching, I don't know, this is like the 70s, like 3-4 hours a day, maybe. I don't know.
But how did they differentiate? Okay, we're not going to buy X because you saw an ad on TV, but what if you see the ad in the newspaper? What if you see the ad on a billboard, the same company? Then how did you get it? No,
trust me, I was looking for every possible workaround and loophole in that rule. The only time actually that worked for me was basically, I remember actually I made a whole pitch to my dad. I clipped the ad from a magazine, I brought it to him. I basically pitched him. It was a literal pitch as far as why I should get this toy that I saw advertised on television. And that's the one he actually bought me, mainly because it had a software programming element to it. It was called a Big Track. You could basically program it with a keypad to do commands and follow a certain path. And he's like, that's actually going to teach him some engineering skills. We'll get him that one. But everything else pretty unsuccessful. No GI Joes in my house now.
It's like, I like that. I wrote it down. Watch whatever you want, but I'm not buying anything that we advertise. Although now mostly they're watching YouTube and it's the paid sponsorships or it's a product and insert. You're not even sure what's an ad anymore. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it's you against Mr. Beast. So good luck with that.
Right. Exactly. Walter, this is fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate the time. So much to hear about. And wait, before we go though, tell people where they can find your podcast, the website, all the information for it.
Sure. So if you search Fund Build Scale on LinkedIn, it'll come right up. Fundbuildscale.substack.com also. And the podcast itself is available on all major platforms, Apple, Spotify, all of them. So please have a listen. And if you want to reach me personally, I'm at fundbuildscale@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from any aspiring founders, investors. If you'd like to pitch me a guest, please get in touch.
Fund, build, scale. And then before we go, though, you mentioned those platforms. Where have you found the most success? Is it Substack? Is it LinkedIn? Is it the regular podcast platforms? Where are you finding the most pickup right now?
Definitely, I would say LinkedIn and Apple Podcasts. LinkedIn is a great place to go and engage folks, but just
so you're not putting the audio on LinkedIn, right? You're just putting a link to the podcast, right?
I am a link, and usually like a pull quote, maybe sometimes sometimes a screenshot of just the Zoom call with the person I'm talking to kind of promote the episode that's coming up. And then this is very funny because I've been using all these AI creative creator tools, and so I'm about to launch a Instagram channel and a TikTok channel to promote and I'll start carving up and dropping like quick drops of videos, basically, which I'll probably end up putting on LinkedIn as well. So
tell me now you got me. Tell me about the AI. What AI tools are you using and how are you using them?
Sure. I'm actually using, so the one I've started using now that is saving me the most time, I'm using Descript. It is software, Descript, Descript. Yeah. And basically it costs about $300, but it's really good software in that it's media editing software. It generates audio and video, and I can import an existing video or an audio file. And what it'll do is basically it'll transcribe that audio file, show me the text on screen. I can edit the text on screen, and it'll basically edit the timeline audio below the text. So I can actually edit text to audio.
You can edit the text and get the audio and video you want out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a huge time saver. I can even import like music and edit. I can edit the entire episode now instead of using a product like GarageBand or something else. I can just do everything in this one tool. It also generates amazing clips with captions for social media as well. So, for example, I did a test a few weeks ago. I started running last year, and so after I finished my 220-second 5K, I shot a video using and then edited together with Descript. And not only was it actually good practice for like the promotion I'm doing for Fund Build Scale, I was able to get like 2,000 views on Instagram just using this great new software with these fantastic features. So there's a plug. Definitely, I love the software. Descript, if you're listening, I would be glad to be your spokesperson.
I like it. Yeah, that's great. I'm always thinking about what are the next best AI tools for podcasting and video and all that. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, I feel kind of bad because this spring I was actually planning to hire an intern of some sort. And then I started using Descript and I realized I do not need an intern right now.
That's exactly. Yeah. There you go. How much time then do you spend on, let's say, per episode? What's the time frame? Let's say record, I don't know, like 30 minutes, let's say 30-minute episode, 60-minute episode. How much time after that are you doing all the edit and post-production stuff?
I generate a transcript. I review the transcript first. I start editing the transcript before I start editing. So the actual audio. So I would say probably takes maybe 3 hours to edit a 30-minute episode.
All right. So like a 6x ratio.
Yeah, about that. I mean, it's definitely faster now. It used to be longer, I think, when I was using GarageBand. And also for season 1, I was actually working with a producer and editor, a friend of mine in LA. And so he was doing all the audio production and editing for me, which was it took longer to turn things around. Now that I'm using these tools where I can actually do it all sitting at my kitchen table, it's just faster. So.
Interesting. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for a little overtime there and the secret sauce, the inside dirt on how you're getting these podcasts start to finish. Walter, amazing. Thank you so much. Fund Build Scale. Now we know definitely where to find it. Now we know how you're doing it. We got the secrets now. And good luck with the new season, and we'll talk soon.
Appreciate it, Eric. Thanks very much for a great conversation. Good talking to you.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.